Hi there! Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local, the podcast where you can find inspiration, tips, and recipes for enjoying more local food and drink. I am David Crowley, your host. In this episode, we'll be talking with Amy Angelli from the Copper Table about this week's CSA Share veggies. I was in a rush when unpacking the latest share, so I'm going to circle back now and give you a quick recap of what we got. In this August share, we found beets with their root and their leafy green tops, a bright yellow zucchini, something a little different, a mini watermelon, classic summer food, scallions, again, and speaking of again, more rainbow chard, and some white onions. Now, let's see what ideas Amy has for these vegetables. Amy Angelli is a food blogger based in the Pacific Northwest. Her focus is fresh produce and cooking from scratch, and when she's not blogging, she works in food service for her local school district and helps out at an organic farm. Hi Amy, welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local.
Hi David, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on here. And as we were chatting before I hit record, I think we confirmed that our first connection was over on Instagram. A nice way for people of common interest to connect. And I think the specific common interest was, I think you were commenting on some garlic scapes. So I know you have some knowledge that you can drop on us about that, but we'll maybe hold that to, get a little more background before we get into that. But
Sure.
we definitely seem to share some common interests in fresh local produce.
Yes. Yeah, I live in an agriculturally rich area that has a long history of farming. In fact, the county where I live supplies 95% of the U.S.'s supply of table beet seed.
Oh,
And
beet seed. Okay, that's interesting.
75% of the U.S. supply of spinach seed.
Seed. So what makes the focus on the seed part of the business and not the crop? Is there something about the
I'm not
conditions
really
or?
sure, but we definitely grow plenty of beets and spinach around here.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there must be something about the weather, perhaps that they're able to process and store and ship seeds out to the rest of the country.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. That's interesting. Yeah. And what's the county? So seeing as
Skagit County.
okay, Skagit County. All right. So if that comes up on like a trivia show or something, if you get that on Jeopardy, all right, you'll be glad you listened to this podcast.
Yeah,
It's gonna be like a $500 clue on Jeopardy. It's not $100 level.
right.
Great. So I don't know, was it growing up amidst that kind of agriculture that got you interested in this kind of being interested in local food, or is there some more to your story? Let's hear how you got interested in this topic.
Well, being around it for so long and to have such a history and so many farms all
Mm-hmm.
around growing so many different things, it's really hard to get away from.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, it is really everywhere, so it's hard not to be interested in it. And
Mm-hmm.
where I live, it's actually really easy to buy local and eat local because it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Just about a mile and a half from my house, I can buy shrimp and salmon right off the boats.
Wow, that's awesome. That's local,
Yeah,
seriously local fish.
it really is. And Washington State University has a Master Gardener program here in the area, and a lot of people who live here go and take the classes.
Hmm.
And we've got a lot of avid gardeners here. So even if they aren't farming, they're still eating things they're growing in their own yard.
Oh wow, that's a great way to do. That's as local as you can get in your
I
own
know.
yard. Nice. And I understand part of your backstory is working on an organic farm, at least for part of your time. You tell us a little bit more about like what's grown there and
So
um,
they specialize in garlic,
mm-hmm.
and the farm is called LaConner Gardens.
Yep.
They're located in LaConner, Washington. And I believe LaConner is the second oldest town in Washington state, if I'm
Oh,
not
interesting.
mistaken.
Huh.
Yeah, and they grow several varieties of garlic there, which means there are all sorts of garlic scapes when they
Hmm.
come around when the season's right. And they have an honesty stand like many of the farms around here do. You go and you pick your produce and you drop the cash in the box, or you pay with Venmo or PayPal and take home your bounty and figure out what to do with it.
Nice. Oh, that's pretty good. And the trust system seems to work. That's a good sign for the community that
For the most
people.
part, it really does. We have all sorts of honesty stands around here.
Hmm. Oh, that's good. That's a sign of social capital. Actually, my day job focuses on the idea of social capital, but that could get us in
Oh,
another direction. But that would certainly be a good indicator. How many honesty farm stands are there in areas? It's
yeah,
probably a good sign of what's the health of the community.
yeah, and at there at LaConner Gardens, I help them out with a lot of the weeding
Okay.
because it's an organic farm. They can't spray,
Right. Yep.
so they they have to have somebody keeping those weeds out of all the crops.
Yep.
And if you let them go, they'll get almost as tall as you are,
Yep.
and before long, you can't find. You don't even know what's growing under there for all
Oh
the
wow.
weeds.
Yeah.
So I help out with that a lot. And it was something that I got into kind of as the lockdowns were ending. And there I was homeschooling like so many other people
Mm-hmm.
by default.
Yeah.
And my next door neighbor was kind of a burned out healthcare worker, and she
Hmm.
started working at the farm, and she said, this has been so therapeutic and relaxing, you should
Mm-hmm.
really try it.
Oh yeah.
And I went
Hmm.
out there last summer, and it was just nice to be outside, and it's really rewarding to spend a couple of hours on a whole row of spinach, and you look down and all the weeds are gone.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you could definitely see, especially, I mean, healthcare being an example of something that's been so stressful in the past couple of years. And it's obviously hard work, but sometimes hard, honest work where you see actual progress. And nobody, the
Hmm.
spinach probably doesn't give you any flack, right?
No.
About being masked or not masked or anything like that. Yeah. So, oh,
No, and
great.
this past fall, I started working in food service for the local school district.
Yeah.
And when the opportunity came up again, when they were, starting to plant out at the farm, I said, you know what? I really enjoy being out there when I can. So, with no school in the summer, I'm still going out there and pulling weeds and
Yeah.
harvesting a thing or two if they need it. And
Oh, good for you. Great. Well, let's go. Speaking of farms, as part of what we do on the show, if it coincides with when I've just picked up something from our local farm share, is to brainstorm about ideas about what to do with some of what I picked up yesterday. And one item that I know we want to talk about is something that is called golden zucchini, which I didn't really know was a thing. I guess maybe I've seen it before, but I don't think I'd seen the term until it was when I get the what's coming. I got an email, what's coming in this week's pickup, and it mentioned golden zucchini. And sure enough, I put a picture of it on the show notes, but you can see it's the shape of zucchini, but a golden color. Do you want to say any more about that squash? Anything you know about it, and then ideas for what to make with it?
Well, I definitely know that it is a zucchini. It's not what you might have heard called a yellow crookneck squash, which is
Mm-hmm.
completely different.
Yeah.
It is a zucchini, just a different color. Just like the striped zucchini that you may have seen that are the dark green and
Yep.
light green zebra stripe.
Mm-hmm.
And you can use it the same way you would use any other zucchini. I
Yep.
like to saute them or roast them. Quick pickling is great for zucchini.
Yep.
Great way to add a little extra flavor to it. Put it on a sandwich.
Nice.
They can usually sit in your fridge for 2 to 4 weeks that way.
The pickle. So a quick pickle. What's the quick way to make a quick pickle?
So, if in the right ratio, you'll want some vinegar, water, a little bit of sugar, peppercorns,
Mm-hmm.
salt.
Yeah.
Any other herbs that you like, really, whether it's some sage, basil, tarragon, rosemary, all you can even use herbs fresh that way. Just put them right in your jar
Yeah.
with your
Oh, okay.
pickling brine
Yeah.
and put your vegetables in there
Yeah.
and put them in the refrigerator, wait a few hours to a day or two, and they're ready to go.
Oh, yeah. That's a good tip. Yeah, because you do pickle. Yeah, being able to extend it 2 to 4 weeks. That's really key, especially if you're whether it's your own garden or if you're doing something like the farm share. You often find you have more than you can eat in a
Hmm.
given or eat or cook in a given week. So that's definitely a good tip. I've been. I think I first tried this last season, and I've tried it again this recipe. You may have come across it. It's for it's called zucchini butter spaghetti. Have you ever come across that?
Yes, I've
It's
been seeing that recently, and I'm really curious. I need to try it. I haven't yet.
it's really good. You just basically like shred up the zucchini and then cook it down for a lot longer than I would typically think to usually if I'm sauteing squash like 5 minutes, but this you really cook it down with some butter and garlic. And so at the end it's very flavorful, a little basil tossed with spaghetti or some other pasta. It's very, very good. So yum. So okay, so but I got to remember that pickling idea because I do feel like I'm like, oh, I like that recipe, but I made it last time I had zucchini, so I got to be mixing it up definitely. So got to get the pickling.
Yeah,
Use a
and
mason jar for the pickling or something else,
I
or
do,
yeah.
yeah. And what's really great about quick pickling versus the traditional canning method, I don't personally have a lot of storage in my house for the
Mm-hmm.
big pots and all of that. So all you really need is just maybe a 1 or 2 quart saucepan
Mm-hmm.
and jars, and that's it.
Yeah.
You
Nice.
don't need a lot of other special equipment to quick pickle. It's really
Okay,
nice.
that is a good tip. And I switching to another veggie. I know you had some ideas for rainbow chard, which we also had.
I like it raw in salads. That's
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
favorite way to eat it. Just cut the stems out
Mm-hmm.
and chop up the greens. I also like to make pesto out of it.
Oh, pesto out of chard. I've made pesto out of a lot of things. I don't think I've tried it with chard. So is it similar
Yeah,
to other
especially if
pesto?
you throw a little basil or a few sage leaves or
Mm-hmm.
something like that in there. It's really nice.
Oh, that does sound good. Or do you use the stems at all or
I
discard this?
do. I
Yeah.
chop them up just like
Yeah.
celery, throw them
Yeah.
in the salad,
Mm-hmm.
or chop some bacon. And once the bacon is pretty much all rendered down, toss your chard in right at the end, just enough to wilt it,
Mm-hmm.
and serve it with the bacon pieces. That's really nice
Oh,
too.
that does sound good. Yeah, I know I spent a little bit of time in the South, and sort of this solution to any kind of greens was always cook with a lot of either bacon or ham of some sort. And so I know that's always something I can do, but it is nice to find out other ways you can get flavor like garlic or spice. But I do find myself coming back to the bacon of it. Always is a good option for that definitely.
Yes, my grandmother grew up on a farm in Tennessee, so I've eaten a lot of vegetables with a lot of pork
Oh yeah,
in my time.
that is definitely the way. Yeah, I was in Kentucky. Yeah, so that's definitely the way that things go there. Now we've touched upon a couple times. I know it's probably not the typical season for seeing garlic scapes, but I mentioned it, you mentioned it, and so I'd love to have you break down because it seems like you definitely have some good info on it. And I found it was something I wasn't super familiar with. So first of all, what is a garlic scape, and then what can we do with it, and also when is it typically in season? And I know that it's obviously going to vary depending on where you are.
So a garlic scape grows up out of the top of the garlic plant.
Mm-hmm.
After the greens have grown up, you see a scape start to poke out. And it's you really need to trim them because eventually it will just flower and
Mm-hmm.
the plant will put all its energy into the scape
Yeah.
and the garlic will not produce as well. It won't be as large.
Mm-hmm.
And so the scape is really just kind of there, and I think people started eating them after a while because they farmers were just throwing them away, and then they
Yeah.
realized, "Well, wait a minute, these are actually pretty good
Right, right.
if I cook them and eat them." And I know some people pickle them. I've not tried it that way, myself. I roast them or sauté them.
Hmm.
They're really nice, in hummus or, ricotta dip
Yeah.
or whipped feta dip.
Yeah. Yeah, and do you find, because I've now worked with them a couple times, it definitely has, how would you describe them? Obviously, it has some kind of garlic flavor. Do you find it similar, or do you use a little bit more, a little bit less? Like if you're, say, substituting it for garlic in a recipe?
I find that they they can tend to have a milder flavor than garlic, but they still have their own
Mm-hmm.
pungency.
Yep.
I prefer them cooked
Mm-hmm.
over raw
Yep.
personally, just like garlic.
Yeah.
I know some people make pesto out of garlic scapes and they don't actually cook them first.
Right.
I think they do better with a light sauté prior to
Okay.
grinding them into a pesto. It's just a personal
Yeah.
preference.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've made it without cooking, but I have to try the other way, do a compare and contrast, definitely.
Yeah, it is pretty strong.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So when do we typically see the garlic scapes, and when do you actually when are the actual regular garlic bulbs typically harvest to put the two maybe on a bit of a timeline, or at least say in your area? I know. Uh,
so I would say for the scapes, they're going to definitely be before the garlic
mm-hmm,
because you need to trim those first. And those are kind of early summer,
mm-hmm, yep,
the scapes. And then right now at the farm, they're actually harvesting and drying garlic.
yep,
Which this year, because of the La Nina weather, everything's been late. So
mm-hmm,
it's not a great timeline right now.
yeah, gotcha,
Normally it would
yeah,
have been
sooner,
sooner,
yep,
um, by a few weeks,
mm-hmm.
but they are pulling garlic right
Okay.
now.
And I love garlic, so I'm talking to somebody who has exposure to a garlic farm. I'm gonna have questions about that for sure. So you mentioned drying the garlic. Is there a period of time it has to dry for before it's ready for consumption, or is it just store better that way? Is that the reason it's dried?
It definitely stores better that way. They haven't, I know they normally do all of the braiding and all of that over the winter. I, they really have never told me
Yeah,
um, how how long they store it, but I know they're able to sell garlic for almost year round.
yeah. That's one. Some foods are so seasonal. I mean, you can, of course, you can buy anything anytime in a grocery store in America these days. And well, supply issues aside, but there's some things like asparagus is one thing I will only try to get when it's spring in season. But garlic, it always seems to be there, so you don't have as much sense of when it actually comes up out of the ground. So it sounds like it's around August sometime if you're in the relatively northern part of the U.S. But it it stays good because of that drying process.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we were chatting a little bit before we hit record. Also, it sounds like you find early fall in the Pacific Northwest, the crops are really good. What are some of the things you look forward to as fall season approaches?
So we have invasive wild blackberries that grow
Hmm.
everywhere, and they are not ripe yet. They usually are not ripe until late August into September, which I love because that's kind of when the fall and winter squashes are starting to be sold on the farms as well as in stores. So you can have blackberries and fall and winter squash at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I've
Oh,
actually
yum.
been able to roast butternut squash and toss it in a salad with
Oh,
blackberries.
that sounds very good.
Yeah, it is really nice. And we have um, hundreds of different varieties of pumpkins grown around
Mm.
here,
Hmm.
and some squashes that um, you don't really find in other parts of the country. There's
Hmm.
one that's a really lovely blue color with a dark orange interior called sweetmeat
Yeah, I definitely haven't heard that
that
one.
that we have here that I have looked online, and it seems to be a Pacific Northwest thing.
Hmm. Oh, interesting. Yeah, there are definitely some unusual squashes out there, and if you visit a farm or do a farm share or something, you definitely get exposed to them. And do you have any
Mhm.
favorites? Well, you mentioned one that sounded good with the blackberry. I don't know if on, I don't think I've mentioned yet, your website's the Copper Table. If we visit, do you have any good squash recipes there? Seeing as by the time this podcast airs, it'll be almost season.
Yeah, I do. I have a sweetmeat squash risotto,
Mm-hmm.
which is similar to a butternut squash
Yeah.
risotto, but I used the sweetmeat
Yeah.
squash. And I have, let me see, as far as fall, I have a red curry squash soup,
Oh, and a soup. Okay. Yeah. So that's,
which is actually the squash is called a red curry
oh, the
squash or a
squash is
Japanese
called that.
pumpkin.
Oh, oh.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's also known as a Japanese
Oh,
pumpkin.
okay. I think maybe I've heard of that. Does it have a curry flavor at all, the squash itself?
No,
Okay.
no, it's just got this really sweet
Hmm.
flavored flesh that just I if I can find some this year, I might make it in a pie,
Yeah. Hmm.
because I can imagine maybe not even having to use quite as much
Oh,
sugar.
okay. With the natural sweetness. Nice.
It just has a natural sweetness. And I have a delicata and butternut squash soup
Oh, okay. That's nice. I
also.
haven't, that's a nice, can you describe delicata squash? I know I come across it a few times and it's a
It's
nice
a
looking,
long, kind of cylindrical
yeah.
shape, kind of an off-white or cream
Yeah.
color
Yeah.
with some sort of mottled dark green
Yeah.
spotting. And when you cut it open, it's just got a very, very pale yellow colored
Yeah.
flesh.
Does it have a, is it the one I'm thinking of that has like, rather than being just round, it kind of is like, kind of almost like a little pattern that if you cut it crosswise, the shape, or am I thinking of something else?
Yeah, and actually you can eat the skin on a
Oh
delicata if you
yeah, right,
slice it
right.
thin. You can roast it and just eat it with the skin on.
Yeah, yes, I've done something like that before. The the Japanese, the curry squash made me think. It's funny. I never heard of curry squash, but I have actually, one of my go-to recipes when I have a lot of butternut squash that I've been doing lately is like it sounded similar, but it's obviously very different. It's taking that and cooking it with like a red curry sauce and some chickpeas, and it's very, so you got this kind of spicy and sweet thing going on, which is very, I like.
It is really nice, yeah.
Nice. But the other thing you were mentioning, actually, that the delicata squash reminded me of is, I think the first time I had or one time I had it roasted as you describe, or similar to what you're describing. I was actually at a friend's house that was serving it with some salmon, which made me think you were saying not only can you get fresh produce where you are, but you can get fresh off the boat produce. So, I mean, fish. So, fish. So, so salmon, is that seasonal as well when you're likely to be able to get salmon off the boat, or is that year round in your area?
It's definitely not year round. Right now, I've been able to find some sockeye in the stores. I haven't gone out to the boats this summer
Mm-hmm.
yet,
Yeah.
but it's usually sockeye, sometimes Copper River salmon.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. So I will say, as much as I am a proponent of eating local, I do much prefer for salmon the wild from the Pacific Northwest, and often winds up, of course, coming here frozen. As opposed, but we do try to eat some local fish too. But I'm not a huge fan of like the farmed Atlantic salmon, which is, I guess, probably geographically less food miles, but try to. I'm one of these people. I'm not like 100-mile diet. I think here our approach is trying to eat as much. The more we can eat locally, great. But sort of, it's not like we're going to get
Yeah.
The sirens aren't going to go off if we have Pacific Northwest salmon in our house or something. We'll try to mix that in. But,
Right.
we do try to get some local fish. There are some outlets for that here as well, as we're near the other coast here in the States. So great. I guess before we wrap, a couple things I want to cover. We've covered a few things, but you're obviously somebody very passionate at eating local food. Anything we didn't cover that's sort of maybe a tip that you have for eating and enjoying local and seasonal food that you'd like to share, or resources for doing that?
You know, um, Google is actually a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
Google CSAs and farms in your area. Try to find, you'd be surprised how many farms do have a year-round farm
Mm-hmm.
stand, whether it's an honesty stand or
Mm-hmm.
not. Even call them, find out, do you have anything in the fall and winter? Can I stop by when you don't have your stand in the summer? Is there anything I can possibly buy from
Oh,
you?
that's a good idea. Yeah, reaching out, because there might be some things that they might not be pushing it as actively in the off season. Yeah.
Also, if there are any local gardening Facebook groups,
Mm-hmm.
try to join those. There are always people posting, I have too much zucchini. Can someone please take
Oh
it?
yeah, that's right. Oh, that's a good idea. You've had luck. You've seen groups like that active. Yeah.
I'm in a few
Mm-hmm.
in my area, and I definitely, someone saying, hey, I have too many apples. I
Mm-hmm.
have too many of this or that. I'm willing to give it away. Or if you have too much of something you want to give
Yeah.
away, can we
Oh,
trade?
that's a great idea. Yeah, there's a group. I have tried doing that because being active in these CSAs, you do run into, and I need to get better at like the pickling and the freezing. I kind of this kind of hubristic idea that I can cook it and everything like before it goes bad or something. It's like that's part of the challenge, but it doesn't always work out. So sometimes I'm just like, it's not going to happen, and so I'll try to give it away. But I've tried to do that through like a more general, like everything is free group, but it's all kinds of random stuff on there, so you don't always get a taker for food specifically. But I could see where a group that's really just focused on food, gardening, and stuff I'd probably have more takers for. What was it? It was something unusual I was trying to give away. Oh, currants. Like, I had fresh currants, which I think when I posted something else, like I don't know what it's, corn, like something that's more common, I have had people say, sure, I'll take it. But it's like, oh, fresh currants. There's like crickets, radio silence, no takers on that one. So, but maybe a gardening
Yeah,
group might have had a taker.
I happen to love stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. The stuff that people say, "Well, I don't know what to do with
Yeah.
that." I see that as a
Yeah.
challenge, around here, we were talking about scapes earlier. Leek scapes are
Oh,
sold
really?
at the farmers
I haven't
markets
heard of that.
here, and I happen to love them,
Hmm.
actually, a little more even than garlic
I have to
scapes. I
keep an
find
eye
them.
out for those. Huh.
Yeah, they're in the
Yeah.
spring, so they come before garlic scapes. They're if leek scapes are around, at least in the Pacific Northwest, spring is
Nice.
here.
Okay.
And I see people walking around the farmers market all the time. Well, what are those? What do I do with
Mm-hmm.
them?
Yeah. And
And
is it similar to garlic scapes, or do you have other things with those?
so they have a mild onion
Okay.
flavor, a
Yeah.
really mild onion
Yeah.
flavor. So they're great raw or
Yeah.
cooked.
Nice.
And I like to just cut the tops off and roast
Yeah.
them for about 10
Mm-hmm.
minutes at 450 with a little salt, pepper, and oil, and they are
Oh, that
phenomenal.
sounds good. I'm gonna have to check them
So if
out
you
next
can
spring,
find them
definitely.
next year, go for
Yeah.
it.
Great. Great. And so I've referenced it a little earlier, but why don't you, before we totally sign off, should give people a sense of where they can find some of your recipes and other insights about local food on the web.
Sure. So my website is called The Copper Table, and it is thecoppertable.com. You can also find me on Facebook. My Facebook page is called The Copper Table, and my Instagram handle is The Copper Table as
Great.
well.
That should be easy enough for people to remember and find. But some of the more specific links you mentioned we'll definitely include in our show notes. And it's been great. You're definitely full of information about local produce and even a little local fish mixed in. So it's been great chatting with you, Amy.
It's been great chatting with you too, David. Thank you so much for having me on.
Sure, it's been fun. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cook Local, Eat Local. To get the show notes with links for recipes and resources we covered today, go to cooklocaleatlocal.com to get the podcast landing page. And please be sure to subscribe to Cook Local, Eat Local wherever you get your podcasts. Make it a great day with some tasty local food on your plate.